Hello class. Okay, this is another in the series that I've been calling the report card of the economy, and this particular one is on the trade balance. The trade balance. Okay, so what is a trade balance? Well, the trade balance comes from this idea that we should track the flow of goods into and out of the U.S. economy, or for that matter, for any country's economy. It has a general formula that the trade balance is equal to the dollar value of your exports minus the dollar value of your imports. So most of you probably know that the current trade balance is in deficit or negative, and all that means is that the dollar value of things that we import must be greater than the dollar value of things that we export to make it negative. Hasn't always been that way. Prior to about the mid-1980s, we were running trade surpluses pretty much every year all the way back until the Great Depression, not the Great Depression, but until World War II. So let's get started. It turns out, you might be surprised to know, that there's no such thing as the trade balance. The trade balance, that term we use, is kind of a generic term. There isn't a formal account by that name. Instead, there are four formal trade accounts, and they are the merchandise trade balance, which is the simplest one, and then the balance on goods and services, which includes everything in the merchandise trade balance plus services. And then there's the balance, what they call the current account, and that includes everything that's on the balance of goods and services plus unilateral transfers, which we will discuss in a little bit. And then there is the capital account, which is kind of the opposite of the other three, and the capital account doesn't keep track of goods and services. Instead, it keeps track of only investment funds flowing into our country and out of our country. And then you never see it in a book, but just for fun, I would like to talk a little bit about an imaginary trade account that I'm just going to call the everything account, where everything is counted. And I will come back to that later. Okay, so the merchandise trade balance, to think of it in a flow, is imagine the United States is going to trade with the rest of the world. So we buy imports from the rest of the world, and we pay for those things with dollars. So when we buy imports, dollars flow out, and then at the same time we sell stuff to the rest of the world. Those are called exports, and dollars flow back. So if the trade balance were in balance, it sounds kind of redundant, but if it were in balance, it would mean that the dollar value of the imports and the dollar value of the exports were exactly the same. Or put another way, the trade balance would be zero. So in the merchandise trade balance, which is the first formal account, what happens is that in the merchandise trade balance we count the importation of physical goods, actual goods. So these would be things that come on boats, or maybe come on a plane from somewhere else, or maybe on a truck or a train across the border from Mexico or Canada. But the merchandise trade balance focuses only on tangible, physical goods. And then of course we would pay for those things with dollars, and then we would sell physical goods to the rest of the world, and they would pay for them with dollars. So the merchandise trade balance is just the accounting of those physical goods. And in case you didn't know, it's been in deficit for quite a while. Now once you think about this for a moment, you'll realize that we trade in things other than physical goods. We also trade in services. For example, people in the rest of the world might want to purchase banking services or insurance services or medical services or marketing services or computer services. All kinds of services from the United States, and none of that stuff would be counted here. Another service that you might not have thought of as a service is when a foreign family comes to the United States for a vacation. Even though nothing really leaves the country, that's considered an export of our service. So vacations to the United States would be an export of vacation services, or if an American family went overseas or to Mexico or Canada for vacation, that would be an import of a service. So that's called the balance on goods and services, and it's counted up exactly like the merchandise trade balance, except in this case it counts both physical goods and services. So we import physical goods and services, and we pay for that with dollars, and then we sell physical goods and services to the rest of the world, and we receive dollars for that. So the balance on goods and services looks very much like the merchandise trade balance, the only difference being that the balance on goods and services includes services, both physical goods and services. Alright, so the next account is called the current account, and this one's a little harder. So the current account is everything that was in the balance on goods and services, plus the current account includes unilateral transfers. Now, what's a unilateral transfer? Well, a bilateral transfer would be one that when you buy something, you get a thing and then the other person gets some money. Bilateral, both parties get something. Pretty much every time all the time that you buy something, it's a bilateral transaction. You get something and the seller gets your money. A unilateral transfer would be when you send money and you don't get anything in return. So for example, suppose you heard on the news of a terrible tsunami someplace, or an earthquake, or a civil war someplace, or starving children, and you felt moved to send money to those folks. You would send money out, but you don't expect anything in return. That's a unilateral transfer. Money goes out, but no money returns. Now, since the money is going out, a unilateral transfer is considered an import. It seems counterintuitive, but think about it for a second. For normal imports, see them down here? Normally when we import, the dollars flow out, and when we export something, the dollars flow in. So a unilateral transfer, if you feel moved to send money to some impoverished people in the rest of the world, a unilateral transfer is dollars flowing out, so it's counted as an import. So, in summary, the current account is simply the balance on goods and services, plus it includes unilateral transfers. It also includes a couple of other things that I'm not going to hold you responsible for, but if you find a more formal definition of the current account, you will see that it also tracks central bank accounting balances and so forth. So like if our Federal Reserve sent dollars to the rest of the world to settle up some account, that would be counted. But I don't really care about that stuff. I just care that you remember that the current account is the same as the balance on goods and services plus unilateral transfers. Now when you add all that stuff up, it turns out that the current account is in deficit. That is, the flow of dollars out of the United States for our imports and for unilateral transfers is more than the return of dollars for our exports and goods and services. So there's kind of like a surplus of dollars that have flowed out of the United States and are sitting somewhere else out there in the rest of the world. And this begs the question, well, what happens to those dollars? They can't eat them, they can't wear them. Why would they hold them? So that brings up the next account called the capital account. And the capital account doesn't pay any attention to physical goods or services or unilateral transfers. Instead, it focuses exclusively on what's happening to funds that flow in and out of our country. So in the rest of the world, they have all this money left over from those deficits in the other accounts, and you have to ask, well, what happens to that money? And what happens to it is it returns to the United States in exchange for U.S. investments. So people in the rest of the world will invest in the United States by buying U.S. stocks, government bonds, maybe real estate. Who knows what all they're buying, but the dollars don't just kind of sit out in the rest of the world kind of hanging in a closet somewhere. They always return to the United States, and that, if you look at it, that makes the capital account positive. So we have a capital account surplus whenever we have a current account deficit. In fact, the easiest way to think of it is the capital account and the current account are kind of opposites of each other, because the capital account just tracks what's happening to all that money that returns to the United States in the form of investments. Alright, now going back to that crazy idea that I posted earlier about the everything account. You remember this slide? Here are the four accounts that you're sort of formally charged with remembering. But then there was this other one called the imaginary or the everything account. Now here's the question. If the everything account counts everything, would it have a surplus or deficit in the account? In other words, the merchandise trade balance has a deficit, but it doesn't count everything. Neither do any of these things. So if you had a trade account and you kept track of everything, merchandise, services, unilateral transfers, capital flows in and out, you kept track of everything, what would the balance be? I hope you can see that an account like that would have a balance of 0 all the time, because the money doesn't just disappear. When China sells us $100 billion or $100 million worth of stuff, and we only buy, say, $90 million of stuff from them, the $10 million doesn't disappear. It returns to the United States as an investment. So when you track everything, the balance would be 0. Okay, so I hope this little lesson on the trade accounts is useful, and good luck.